Good afternoon. Do you hear me all? Oh, they're all mute. Good afternoon. I call to order the Subcommittee on Oversight. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. I hate doing this impersonally. Forgive me, blame me. But the fact of the matter is, we're best when we're all together in person. No one knows that better than Dr. Rose, my longtime friend. Thank you to everyone for joining today. This is a super committee. I've read your bios a couple of times, and you folks know what you're talking about in an issue that is very, very important to Americans, expanding access to higher education and the promise it holds. Dr. Rose knows I believe that the community colleges are the engine for the next recovery. We're holding this hearing virtually in compliance with the regulations for remote committee proceedings. Before we turn into today's important topic, I want to remind members of a few procedures to help you navigate the virtual hearing. This is critical today. We are in the midst of votes, so we're running here, running there. I will leave. Somebody will take my place. But when I vote, I'll come back. First, consistent with regulations, the committee will keep microphones muted to limit background noise. Members are responsible for unmuting themselves when they seek recognition or when recognized for their 5 minutes. Second, when members are present in the proceeding, they must have their cameras on. If you need to step away to attend another proceeding or vote, as I said, please turn your camera and audio off rather than logging out on the platform. Third, we will dispense with our practice of observing the Gibbons rule and instead go in order of seniority for questioning, alternating between majority and minority, beginning with the members of the Oversight Subcommittee. We have other members who have joined us as well today. Finally, without objection, Representative Evans is authorized to serve as chair in the event I need to step away from the hearing. I thank you for all your continued patience as we navigate these procedures to continue serving our country together in this great time of need. And with that, I will now turn to the important topic of today's hearing, expanding access to higher education and its promises. Today, the Subcommittee on Oversight will examine an important and timely topic, access to and affordability of higher ed. Study after study has documented how higher education helps Americans get good paying jobs, support a decent home, and comfortably raise a family. Higher education is a gateway to the middle class. Yet, for many young people, especially those of color and from low income backgrounds, significant barriers to higher education exist. Those barriers may have even multiplied during the pandemic. Thanks to Congressman Jimmy Gomez and Senator Bob Menendez, our bill to make student loan a debt forgiveness tax-free through 2025 passed in the American Rescue Plan. But we need to examine how else we can help students. We are targeting the students most in need of aid. Are there ways to use the tax code to enable students, especially low-income ones, to receive higher education? That's a question. And we also face a titanic crisis hanging over a generation of college graduates, crippling student loan debt. Student loan debt totals approximately $1.7 trillion. The average debt load of America's 45 million student borrowers is $38,000. This often delays recent graduates from buying homes, starting families, and moving into the middle class. It is a challenge of our time. We must understand why the cost of college are outpacing other costs in the economy, and we must offer more relief to those struggling to pay their education. As we return to normalcy, it is also appropriate to look at how the pandemic has affected our institutions of higher learning. New burdens have been placed on them, from COVID testing to the expansion of online learning. We must explore how the pandemic affected our higher educational institutions, including their ability to provide an affordable education to all students. You'll hear about that from our witnesses. To help us understand, we have an impressive panel. I don't use the term lightly. All experts in these matters, I thank them for their coming and looking forward to the testimony. First, I will yield 5 minutes to my friend, ranking member Mike Kelly from the great state of Pennsylvania for his opening statement. Mike?
Oh, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thanks for holding this hearing today on expanding access to higher education. Now, Republicans have long supported efforts to make sure Americans of all backgrounds have the ability to advance themselves through higher education. Back in 2015, Republicans supported making the American Opportunity Tax Credit permanent. Republicans also support the importance of the Lifetime Learning Credit. Recently, Republicans and Democrats on this committee came together to pass a package of retirement bills that includes an innovative education provision. This provision, which we hope will become law, incentivizes retirement savings while also reducing student loan debt. It would allow employers to make matching contributions into an employee's 401k based on the employee's payment of student loan balances. And just last week with Mr. Doggett, we introduced a bipartisan legislation called the Tax-Free Pell Grants Act. This would expand the usage of Pell Grants on a tax-free basis and ensure students don't lose out on any benefits of existing tax credits. Now, many Americans face the decision between paying down student loan debt and saving for retirement. This legislation would help workers to do both. Now, when it comes to other things Congress can do to reduce barriers to higher education, we should be focused on supporting a wide variety of ways for Americans to advance themselves. That support should be there whether someone pursues a 4-year college degree, a 2 years associate's degree, an apprenticeship, or some other form of professional training. Our approach cannot be a one-size-fits-all. We need to meet Americans where they are. We need to support choice and flexibility so that Americans can obtain educational advancement without having to put their lives on hold for 4 years. But the answer isn't free college for everyone or widespread student loan cancellation. Studies show that these actions won't solve the challenges that many Americans face. But we have a lot of room for common ground and innovation that can help address barriers that many face in furthering their education. And I hope we can work together on these issues, Mr. Chairman. And that is why I'm looking forward to hearing from all of our witnesses, but especially from Scott Pulsipher, the president of Western Governors University. Scott will be able to share with the subcommittee the many exciting and innovative things going on at WGU. WGU strives to provide affordable, high-value degrees to underserved learners. WGU is an online-only university that uses a competency-based, on-demand approach to higher education. This means students have the flexibility to learn and advance through coursework at their own pace and in a way that fits the demands that they have in their life. WGU's approach to higher education has lowered barriers to those seeking a college degree across our country. Now, we can learn from WGU's success, so thank you, Scott, for being here, and thank you to all of our witnesses for being here. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Words. We are next going to hear from our panel, but thank you, Mr. Kelly. Your words are on target. Thank you to our distinguished witnesses for taking the time to appear before us today to discuss this very important issue. I will introduce our 5 witnesses and then turn to each of them for their testimony. Without objection, all members' opening statements will be made part of the record. Our first witness, Dr. Marshall Anthony. He is a senior analyst at the Center for American Progress, where he focuses on higher education policy. Our next witness is Dr. Susan Wheeler Johnston. She is the president and chief executive officer of the National Association of College and University Business Officers. Our third witness is Dr. Stephen Rose, my friend from Paterson, New Jersey. He is the president of the Passaic County Community College, on which I served many moons ago, which is located in my congressional district. Our fourth witness is Dr. Susan Dinersky. I hope I'm correct on that. She's a professor of public policy at the University of Michigan. Right. Our final witness is Dr. Scott Pulsipher. He is the president of Western Governors University. Each of your statements will be made part of the record in its entirety. I would ask that you summarize your testimony in 5 minutes. To help you with the time, please keep an eye on the clock that should already be pinned to your screen. If you do go over your time, I will notify you with the tap of my gavel. Dr. Anthony, you may begin.
Chairperson Pasquale, Ranking Member Kelly, and members of the subcommittee, thank you for the opportunity to testify today. I appear before you as a researcher on higher education, but I have also lived the failures of the higher education system. As a young Black man from a low-income single-parent household, I received the maximum Pell Grant throughout my undergraduate studies to help pay for college. But I did not have enough financial aid to cover other necessities, such as housing, food, textbooks, or transportation. That meant when I should have been sleeping, I spent countless hours staring at the ceiling, worrying about expensive course materials that professors required me to purchase. It also meant canceling my meal plan in order to pay for gas to get to campus and to participate in internships. And it even meant chipping in at times to help my family cover a utility bill. Through hard work, yes, but also a great deal of good fortune, I made it here before you today. But far too many other Black, brown, low income, and college students with disabilities never make it to the graduation stage to collect a diploma, including those very close to me. A large portion of college students today are, in many cases, working adults, attending college part-time and raising children. Like some of my family, classmates, and students I've taught, they are juggling demands that would strike you or I as nearly impossible, all in a desire to give their family a better life. Never has a college degree been more necessary to make it in this country. Nearly 2/3 of jobs require some form of post-secondary education, and yet our higher education system is not equipped to do its job. Consider these 4 troubling facts. First, the Pell Grant is not what it used to be. Pell is the cornerstone federal aid program for students from low-income backgrounds like myself to help pay for college. At its peak, close to 50 years ago, Pell once covered nearly 80% of the cost of attendance at public four-year institutions. Today, the maximum Pell Award covers less than 1/3 of the average cost of tuition, fees, and room and board. Second, if you think students today can still work their way through college, think again. In 47 states, on top of any and all financial aid they receive, low-income students need to work more than 15 hours per week to pay for a public four-year education. Third, community colleges operate on only half the revenue that public four years receive. That means that community colleges don't have the resources they need to adequately serve low-income students, as well as Black and Latinx students who are more likely to attend community colleges. And fourth, even before the pandemic, public higher education was already in deep trouble. When the pandemic began, only 18 states had fully recovered from cuts made in the wake of the Great Recession. These are just a few of the reasons why so many students leave college with no degree and debt they cannot repay. Black borrowers like myself, who are hard hit by employment discrimination and have nearly 10 times less wealth than white families, are most likely to suffer. The system has failed too many students. The ability to graduate should not be conditional upon a student such as myself having good fortune, if you want to call it that. But we've created and perpetuated a system where that unfortunate reality has been the standard for far too long. The United States can and should do better. No excuses. I ask you today to reinvest in an equitable American dream by better supporting college students, limiting debt, and investing in community colleges and public four-year institutions in order to build a higher education system that actually works for people from all walks of life. Thank you again for the opportunity to testify, and I look forward to answering your questions.
Thank you for Dr. Johnston, you are now recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you. Chairman Pascrell, Ranking Member Kelly, thank you for inviting me to be part of this important hearing today. I'm Susan Wheeler Johnston, President and CEO of NACUBO, a professional organization that serves financial officers from colleges and universities across the country. In March 2020, when the potential impact of the pandemic was becoming clear, NACUBO strived to ensure that despite this crisis, any student who wanted to continue their higher education studies could do so, and no college would fail because of the crisis. To that end, the pandemic relief legislation passed by Congress has made a very meaningful impact, and I want to thank the subcommittee and your fellow lawmakers for recognizing and responding to the urgent crisis faced by the higher education sector, which educates more than 16 million undergraduate students and is among the top 10 largest employers in 40 states. Without this legislation, more students would have had to pause or abandon their studies, and across the country, we would have seen deeper institutional budget cuts that would have meant more loss of jobs, shuttering of programs, and fewer resources for student support, financial or otherwise. Colleges face substantial fixed costs that do not abate, even during a global pandemic. Even when most students were taking classes remotely, colleges and universities still had to maintain their facilities, pay faculty and staff, continue offering services to students, and more. They also face significant new expenses related to testing, cleaning, and social distancing, and they made unplanned technology investments, from software licenses and training to improved internet access for students, faculty, and staff. As our nation's colleges and universities are preparing for the fall 2021 term, some colleges are optimistic about their financial health. But just as our nation experienced an uneven impact of the pandemic, we're seeing the same in the higher education sector. For many, the pandemic amplified an already downward trend relating to changing demographics and a regional population shift. Among many community colleges, small private colleges, and regional public universities, there is concern about fall 2021 enrollment and implication for staffing and budgeting. However, through it all, institutions and their leaders remain steadfastly committed to their educational missions and the indispensable lifelong value of education. In the wake of a global health crisis, the outcomes realized by those with post-secondary credentials are in stark contrast to those without. As the pandemic put pressure on employment across many industries, individuals with higher levels of education were more likely to be employed. Individuals with a high school education or less faced a 19.2% unemployment rate in April 2020, compared to an 8.5% unemployment rate among those with bachelor's degrees or higher. This dividend of higher education, along with others, should be available to more people, and colleges and universities are contributing to keeping college affordable and accessible, despite the high and increasing costs they bear to offer a high-quality educational experience. NACUBO sees this repeatedly in our own surveys. The 2020 NACUBO TIAA study of endowments found that the 703 participating institutions spent more than $23.3 billion from their endowments, with about 49% of the funds going directly to student financial aid. Our NACUBO tuition discounting study of 361 private nonprofit colleges showed that in the last academic year, nearly 90% of first-year undergraduates received institutional financial aid, and it covered more than half their tuition and fees on average. Beyond these examples, federal policies can be strengthened so that they're working together to aid students with the cost of college. For example, charitable giving should be encouraged. Policies that discourage giving and take charitable resources away from education, like the tax on net investment income, should be reversed. Federal tax credits that ultimately lower the cost of college should be improved. And we urge Congress to increase the value of the Pell Grant, the cornerstone of our country's investment in higher education, to ensure more students can access college in the first place. Colleges and universities and lawmakers, as well as charitable organizations, families, and employers, must continue making the investments necessary to make college more affordable so that as a nation we can achieve a more educated and inclusive populace. We appreciate the subcommittee's interest in expanding college access and increasing affordability so that more students can experience the lifelong benefits college degrees offer. Thank you very much for including me in this conversation.
Thank you, Dr. Johnston. At this time, I've been notified that at the direction of the chair, without objection, the subcommittee will stand in recess for 10 minutes.
read it, so I didn't have to hear it. So I went to vote, and we're trying to switch here, but this is pretty chaotic. It was very chaotic, Dr. Johnston. Anyway, our next speaker, the committee will come back to order. Our next speaker will be Dr. Rose from the Passaic County Community College. Done a fantastic job there. I say that without any hesitation. So you better be good today.
All right.
Dr.
It
Rose?
is great to it is great to call you chairman. That's we've called you many titles before. It's great. It's great
You
to
called me
have
many
chairman.
names before, be honest.
Yeah, that may be true.
Go
Well,
ahead,
thank
Dr.
you.
Rose. We're anxious to
All
hear.
All right. I'm Steve Rose. I'm president of Passaic County Community College. Our main campus is in the great city of Paterson, New Jersey, which is the third largest city in our state. I've been president since 1996 and have been at the college since 1987. When I arrived, we had approximately 2,000 students per year, and currently we serve over 11,000. And this growth is fairly typical of community colleges during this time span. 80% of our students are minority, with many having English as their second language. While many enrolled to seek an associate degree for either transfer to a baccalaureate institution or direct entry into a career such as a registered nurse, others come seeking our workforce development programs leading to industry-recognized credentials in healthcare and technology fields. The topic of this hearing, expanding access to higher education and the promise it holds. This is why community colleges were created. PCCC, like most community colleges, is an open admission institution, serving students from varied educational backgrounds. While some enroll fully ready for the rigors of college-level work, others are ill-prepared. Some students enter ready to enroll in advanced calculus, while others need basic arithmetic. Some enter with well-developed writing skills, while others struggle with literacy. Community colleges students are often the first generation in their family to attend college. At PCCC, many students are not only the first to attend college, but they're the first in their family to graduate from high school. We welcome all these students. We believe, regardless of age, that every student should not be limited in life by a lack of education. It is never too late. A college degree or credential is still the easiest path to the middle class, and our programs are designed to help students reach these goals. However, these students face significant challenges. Many work full-time while attending school. The type of jobs they work in often have unpredictable schedules and mandatory overtime. Approximately 20% of our students are single parents. The pandemic has only enhanced these challenges. During the past year, students faced unprecedented challenges. Many struggled adapting to remote classes, lacked the technology they needed. Many lost their jobs and were directly impacted by COVID. The financial support our college and students received from the federal government was necessary and impactful. We were able to provide laptops for all of our students who needed them and provide financial help when needed. I am not exaggerating when I report that the aid to students was in many cases life-sustaining and changing. Enrollments at community colleges have historically been counter-cyclical with the economy. During economic recessions, our enrollments tend to grow and decline when the economy is thriving. When individuals have strong employment options, they tend to put off enrolling in college. Probably not a good idea. At PCCC and most community colleges, our enrollment hit an all-time high in the early 2010s and has been declining since 2012. In 2017, we saw a large decline in enrollment when DACA and other undocumented students no longer felt comfortable attending college due to the national debate on immigration. For the most part, these students have yet to return. This impacted both students who were new and students who were currently enrolled. The pandemic has brought challenges that we anticipate will last for many years. Enrollment at PCCC dropped approximately 17% this past year. Most of the decline came from newly enrolled students rather than continuing students. Enrollment patterns from local high schools tend to follow fairly predictable historic patterns. For the fall 2020 semester, we experienced a relatively minor decrease in new student enrollment from more affluent school districts. The loss of student enrollment from urban districts was dramatically worse. Enrollment from several urban high schools was down 50%, 50. In our discussion with these districts, it is clear that these students then did not choose to go elsewhere. They just did not go to college. The outlook for fall 21 continues to be grim. Many urban high schools report that students stopped attending remote classes at some point during the year, and many will not be graduating. In some cases, the school districts report that they have totally lost touch with these students. Significantly, it appears that students who do plan to attend this fall are coming with greater academic deficiencies. From a preliminary analysis of placement scores, these students will need more remedial classes than is typical, since research has consistently shown that students who enter below college level graduate in greatly reduced numbers. It would appear that college graduation rates could be hurt for years to come. I believe I can speak for all community colleges when I say that we will continue to do what is ever necessary to ensure the success of our students. While challenges are daunting, the cost of failing is far too great. Thank you.
The questions. I got 450 questions, but I want you to know we're very appreciative, and we'll have a chance for questions a little later. I want to thank you very much. Professor Dynarski, you are now recognized for 5 minutes, and thank you for being here.
Chairman Pasquale, members of the committee, I'm honored to testify before you today. A college education is a great investment. Over a lifetime, a person with a bachelor's degree will earn, on average, $1 million more than a less educated worker. Even with record high tuition prices, a BA pays for itself several times over. But as college has grown more valuable, it has also grown more unequal. Low-income children are very unlikely to earn a BA when they grow up. Just 9% do so. The odds are 6 times higher for children from upper income families. 54% of them will earn a BA. This gap is not shrinking. If anything, it's growing. I give you these statistics to get us thinking about our goals for the education tax incentives. Whether they've been a success, after all, depends on the goals we set for them. Is our goal to ease the pinch of college costs for upper income families whose children attend expensive colleges? If so, then the tax incentives do a passable job. I think our goal is far more ambitious, that we want to open the doors of college to anyone who can benefit. If this is our goal, then the current tax incentives are a complete failure. Why? The tax incentives can increase schooling only if they put money into the hands of those for whom price is a barrier, when and where they need that money. These potential college students who need assistance are overwhelmingly from low-income families. They attend community colleges where tuition and fees average $3,800, or a state university where they average $10,000, $600. This is who we should keep in mind as we design tax incentives for college, a low-income person attending a public college. Unfortunately, the education tax incentives do very little for low-income students at public colleges. Perversely, they provide the most money to upper-income students at private colleges. Here are some facts that drive home that statement. The tax credits are only partially refundable. A low-income student gets a credit of just $1,000 a year, while a richer one gets $2,500. The full lifetime learning credit goes only to students who pay tuition and fees over $10,000. Community colleges, which educate a majority of undergraduates, charge less than half that. The tuition deduction and student loan interest deduction pay the most to families with the highest tax rates. The Coverdell and 529 savings plans benefit those who can afford to save and who face high tax rates, that is, the wealthy. And if a low-income family does manage to save, they're punished for it. Their assets count against eligibility for federal student aid, as well as for safety net programs like SNAP. The regressivity of the tax incentives is not all that hampers their effectiveness. They are simply too complicated and confusing to affect schooling decisions. The IRS publication devoted to explaining them fills 95 pages. Families can't respond to a price subsidy if they do not know about it or understand it. We are better off funding simple programs that work than trying to explain complex programs that don't. If our goal is expanded college access, the tax incentives for higher education are a terrible policy. We must set aside the illusion that they increase education. The evidence is clear on this question. As it stands, the education tax incentives are essentially a transfer program. They get money to households that have sent people to college. To do this modest job well, they should impose minimal paperwork and go to families who most need the money. So here are some recommendations. First, create a single, fully refundable credit that covers not just tuition and fees, but books, room, and board. This comprehensive definition of schooling expenses is what's used for the 529 and Coverdell accounts, which primarily benefit wealthy families. A much narrower definition is used for the credits, which have the potential to help at least some low-income students. Second, deliver the credit at the time of college enrollment when it can make a difference. Finally, you asked me to address the endowment tax. It's proposed to waive this tax if schools make sufficient effort to be affordable. Here's one way to define such effort. Does a college meet the full financial need of its students as defined by the FAFSA and the federal methodology? Many private colleges and a handful of publics that require that students fill out the College Board's profile form and uses expanded data to measure need. This more than doubles the paperwork burden on students and increases uncertainty for families. The questions on the profile distinguish well between the rich and the extremely rich, but even a student who gets an automatic EFC of 0, that is, has the highest need, has to complete this very complicated form. The profile should not be required of low-income students. In conclusion, the education tax benefits provide relief for upper-income people who've gone to college, but they provide comparatively little relief for low-income families. The evidence is clear that the tax incentives do nothing to expand access. They are no substitute for federal financial aid or for free college. Thank you for your time.
Very much, Dr. Donarski. We appreciate your efforts today, and I want to thank you. And now our final witness, I believe, is Mr. Pulsifer. You are now recognized for 5 minutes, and thank you for being with us today.
Thank you, Chairman Pasquarello, and thank you, Ranking Member Kelly and the distinguished members of the subcommittee. I am grateful for your convening this hearing today and certainly for the opportunity to offer perspective on a topic that is core to WGU's founding. The promise of higher education is sorely in need of renewal to fit the times in which we live. My name is Scott Pulsifer. I serve as president of Western Governors University. WGU is a private nonprofit institution founded in 1997 by a bipartisan group of 19 governors who saw the opportunity to leverage technology and competency-based education to expand access, improve outcomes, and better align learning with workforce needs. Our mission is to change lives for the better by creating pathways to opportunity. Today, we serve more than 130,000 full-time students, of whom 70% would be classified in one or more categories of underserved populations. The idea that the pathway to opportunity should be open to all is core to our shared ideals as a nation. This idea remains a bipartisan objective and one held not just by our elected leaders, but by every parent and every person in this country. Sadly, it is increasingly evident that higher education has not lived up to this promise as a great equalizer. According to the Pell Institute, students from the highest income quartile were nearly 5 times more likely to earn a bachelor's degree by age 24 than those who grew up in the lowest income quartile. For advantaged students, the education pathway can be a natural extension of one's life journey. For those marginalized, it can be a mountain traverse. For higher education to fulfill its promise, it must be a pathway that can be traveled by every individual, where students have flexibility, support, and quality of instruction to succeed. The future of work demands the continual acquisition of new skills and knowledge in order to progress in one's career and life. To stay competitive as a nation, higher education must meet the diverse needs of Americans across their careers for both the first and the next opportunity. And for higher education to be a pathway, it must lead to opportunity. While that may sound obvious, it is not a conclusion that reveals itself from a study of higher education's outcomes. Nationally, 6-year completion rates hover at 60%. For Black students, they're closer to 40%. For financially independent students, half of today's enrollment, it is estimated that only 1 out of 3 will complete their degree. For too many, higher education is a path to nowhere, paved with debt. Perhaps most importantly, higher education must not just be affordable, but valuable. Public investments in higher education should result in progress in economic mobility. The Post-Secondary Value Commission, supported by the Gates Foundation and the Institute for Higher Education Policy, found that 649 institutions leave their students with zero economic return after accounting for the cost of attendance. Many of the ideas to address higher education issues today often focus on how to help pay for it. And pay they must, as the inflation-adjusted cost. That's the inflation-adjusted cost of higher education has risen 120% since 1985. Those who argue that this burden is too heavy for students to bear are absolutely correct. We need greater accountability for the cost of education, not just new models of paying for it. But for today's working learner, affordability is not the only barrier, and often not the most difficult to overcome. Lack of flexibility in scheduling, mode, online or in classroom, location, faculty interaction, etc., limit student access, progress, and completion. Policy should consider critical challenges of completion, cost, relevancy, and ultimately value. We do taxpayers a disservice and institutions of higher education too many favors by merely shifting the cost of higher education without serious reform. I'm grateful to the subcommittee for the opportunity to share my perspective and to share the example of WGU. Our tuition and fees are less than $8,000 a year. Our competency-based model and flat rate pricing allows students to progress at a pace that is right for them. Through our responsible borrowing initiative, we have driven per student debt at graduation down by 32% over the past 7 years to just over $14,000 today, less than half the national average. From Gallup surveys, 77% of our graduates say it was worth the cost compared to 37% of students nationally. We offer degrees and credentials aligned with in-demand job fields and map learning outcomes to needed skills. Our graduates are employed at rates at or above national averages, with income gains nearly double the national average. At WGU, we know how important affordability and flexibility are to increasing both access and attainment. I'm proud that WGU is living proof that America can do better in higher education, and on behalf of our individuals, families, and society, we desperately need to. I yield my time to the subcommittee, and I look forward to discussing these issues in more depth.
Thank you, Mr. Pulsifer. You're yielding your time. Am I off? That's it. Thank you, Mr. Pulsifer, for your comments. They were on target. And I will open the hearing for questions. Without objection, each member will be recognized for 5 minutes to question our witnesses. Please stick to the 5 minutes. I'm talking to myself as well. If the witnesses will respond with short and concise answers, all members should be able to ask questions. We will not observe the Gibbons rule, as I said, in this remote setting, and will instead go in order of seniority for questioning, alternating between minority and majority, beginning with the members of the Oversight Subcommittee. Members are reminded to mute or unmute yourselves when you are recognized for your 5 minutes. I'll begin by recognizing myself for 5 minutes. Mr. Rose, you got the first question.
Okay.
It's good to see you. As I said before, your expertise is needed to help us understand how the pandemic affected transition from high school to college in Passaic County. How is the lack of in-schooling learning and the access of online learning affected students in their readiness for college? Go right ahead.
Well, one of the schools you're very familiar with, our own Kennedy High School down the block from here, we saw a 50% decline in the number of students last fall who enrolled here than normally do. That's devastating. The same was true of Passaic High School. The same was true of several of the other urban high schools. But the suburban high schools were relatively unchanged from previous years. So there's obviously something going on when you look at the difference between what's going on in the urban schools and what's going on in the suburban schools. And right now, we're starting to see students, our numbers are off again for fall 21. And the students who are coming, who are enrolling, and when we're assessing where they are, it looks like many of them are going to be starting further behind than typical. They're going to need more developmental classes in order to try to catch them up. And, that's going to affect these students for years to come.
Well, you're intending, I believe, to start up again, person to person in
Absolutely.
September. Am I correct or
Yes,
incorrect?
totally correct.
Now, you've already stated in your problem, this is necessary, very important. Are you going to be ready?
Yeah, we're going to be ready, but one of the things we're doing this summer, we have all these students who are not graduating from high school. So we're offering them a free GED program right now if they're willing to try and get that credential so that they can start college.
What are you going to do with the high schools where the obvious attendance rate was down and the applications are down to you?
Right.
What are we getting to them? Are we talking to them?
Well, we're talking to the guidance counselors and to the superintendent and to the principals every day, and anyone they can identify, we're doing it for free. Anything they need, we're ready to step up and try and catch these students up so that they can start college this fall and be ready.
Dr. Rose, are you an advocate of the STEM program, which we're putting in a lot of high schools in America?
Absolutely, of course.
And it's been very successful at your school.
Oh, look, we send about 20 students every summer to NASA for 5-6 weeks. When they come back, they're transformed. These students, their lives are changed. So, STEM education. But one of the problems is we have to start working with students when they're in middle school, and we're doing that. Because if by the time they get to senior year in high school, if they haven't had enough math and science, going into one of the STEM areas is very difficult, not impossible, but very difficult. So we've got to work with them at a young age to try and make sure they're ready for a STEM career.
I was over at the Boys and Girls Club in Patterson, and they're doing a great STEM program.
Yeah.
Are you aware of that program?
Oh, we're working with them, sure, of course.
It's a good program, and I'm all for it, 100%. STEM program to me is our way out and one of the engines that you guys in the tech schools can be center stage here. We're missing the boat if we don't support you guys. One more question. I understand that the college is tuition free for students with family incomes below $65,000. Is that correct?
That is correct. That's a new program in New Jersey. Community
Please.
College Opportunity Grants.
Yes. Please explain how that impacts your ability to attract students, more students. Could you also address how Congress's simplification of the free application for federal student aid forms can contribute to improved access to higher education?
As you heard in testimony from the professor before, if it's not simple, it doesn't work. It has to be simple. We have so many students who would qualify for a Pell Grant, but they can't get through the application process. They get thrown into this morass of verification, and we're asking them to bring in documents, from estranged relatives that they haven't seen in years, and that's the only way they can get financial aid. We have to keep it simple. Things like the American Opportunity Tax Credit. It's a wonderful program, but I've been doing this for 40 years now, and I've worked with students and parents. I have never once heard a student say, "Oh yes, I can afford college because of a refundable tax credit." That's not why they come. They come because we have a simple message. Right now in New Jersey, we could say, if your family income is under $65,000 a year, you can attend college for free. That's the kind of message we have to send.
Dr. Rose, thank you for your simplicity. That's what we need. Just keep it simple. We should tell that to the Congress of the United States. We have a problem of doing that. Let's go to the next person we're going to have is Mr. Kelly for 5 minutes to ask your question, sir.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you very much. Mr. Paulson, right, I really find your testimony interesting. This idea of having the flexibility to choose things. I think there's one thing this pandemic has pointed out to us is you don't have to be on campus to learn. There's other ways to learn. And I'm really interested in what WGU has been able to do. So in your testimony, you mentioned a competency-based approach at WGU. How does that go at your own pace approach play out in a practical way for students with obligations? Because we know a lot of them have jobs that they have to do. They have families. They don't have the same ability to attend class from more early in the morning to late at night. So how do you do that?
Yeah, thank you, Ranking Member Kelly, for that question. And thank you also for the recognition of WG's innovation in this regard. The competency-based education model simply relies upon keeping the standards for learning constant for every individual who goes through it and letting the time vary. What that simply allows to occur is that individuals that may have a particular proclivity for learning one subject matter or may have had prior experience in it, they can actually accelerate through those courses and that learning at their pace that's right for them and dedicate more time to focus on the new concepts or those topics and courses that are new to them. In doing so, what that actually allows our students to do is move at a pace that is faster than the typical kind of credit hour, 15-week kind of term model that's in traditional higher education, such that our graduates, our undergraduates finish their degree on average in about 2 years and 4 months for a total cost that's going to be about $16,000 to them. And so the competency-based education model is just more flexible to allow us to design curriculum and learning outcomes that are relevant to the opportunities and jobs they're going to pursue, while also being flexible enough for them to focus the time and attention where they need it.
I really, the term you use are working learners. The college I went to, University of Notre Dame, at one time, and its whole formation was because there wasn't a place for migrants coming into our country to go and get educated, especially depending on what religion they practice. So a lot of what happened in South Bend was the result of bringing education to those who could never have afforded education. But I will tell you this. So when I enrolled in Notre Dame in 1966, it was $1,800 a semester or $3,600 a year. It's currently $74,000 to attend Notre Dame. So I don't know how in the world people ever get to go there. Although I do know with the aid that the average cost comes down to $32,096. How have you been able to keep the cost of education at WGU down? And what can other institutions learn from your whole process and the way you look at this and making it affordable for those working learners?
Yeah, the working learners, for everyone's benefit here, is that is the more common nature and profile of the learners today enrolled in college and in higher education generally than we might presume. Well more than 50% of all students are working full-time or part-time. And so that does require significant demands on their time. From a cost standpoint, it's pretty simple at WGU, which is first and foremost, we put the student at the center of everything we do. They are our primary customer. Our job is to help them progress, complete, and be on a pathway to opportunity. In doing so, all of our costs are centered on the instructional model, on the curriculum development, on the technology that allows us to reach and teach them where they are. And so that has allowed us to not invest in buildings and classrooms and campuses and other student life things that are not as common nor as needed for those working learners. We are very focused on the acquisition of capability, skill, and knowledge that is needed for them to progress in their lives, and are probably less focused on other emerging adult experiences, if you will, that can comprise a large portion of the operating costs of universities and colleges today. And so the last thing I will say for the individual is pretty important. The combination of delivering online, 100% of our curriculum is delivered online, and the competency-based model where we have flat tuition, that we have costs of under $4,000 for 1 6-month term in which a student can complete as many courses as they are able. And so as they actually can go at the pace that's right for them, they actually end up spending less time and less cost to actually complete their degree.
Listen, I want to thank you all for being here today. I really appreciate that information. Please do not pass anything I said on to President at Notre Dame, Father Jenkins. I'm sure he'll come back at me and say, hey, we missed you at the first collection and the second collection. You alumni need to start manning up here. But listen, thanks for what you're doing. That model, though, Chairman, that model is one that makes sense. And I know all the rest of you are working with the same ideas on how to make it more affordable. That return on that investment is incredible. So thank you all for what you're doing. Mr. Pulser, thank you. I'm going to stay in touch with you. I have some more questions. I don't have time now, but your use of mentors and the way you're doing this virtual learning is absolutely critical. But we'll get back to that at another time. But thank you all for being here. Mr. Pulser, thank you so much. Again, Mr. Chairman, thank you. Great hearing.
Thank you. And now, being consistent with the committee practice, we'll move to a 2-to-1 questioning ratio, beginning with Mr. Swazi. Tom?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm going to try and keep it simple for the people in Congress that are so complicated. listen, 60% of Americans do not graduate from college. I mean, that's the majority of the people in the country. I've been in public life for 25 years, and we've always been encouraging people go to college, go to college, go to college. 60% do not graduate from college. And I looked at the U.S. Census a few years ago, and it said there's 105 million full-time jobs in America. And of the 105 million full-time jobs, 89 million of those 105 million jobs pay less than $75,000 a year. So, I had an epiphany when I was meeting with some welders one time. They came to my office. These were all young guys that had suits on. They were, young guys, and they were part of a union. And I said, what made you join the union? He said, well, my father was mad at me. And I wasn't doing well in school. My grandfather told me to join the union. He knew somebody. And then the other guys told similar stories, almost like they were almost sheepish about it. I said, well, how much money did you make last year? And the first guy was in his late 20s. He made $100,000 a year. The second guy was early 30s. He made like $120,000. And the third guy made like $145,000. And they get up at 5 in the morning and they travel hours to go to work. And, but these guys, and they work really hard. They work a lot of overtime. But they're living a great life. I was like, you guys are doing great. You're doing fantastic. We should be encouraging more people to do that. So I want to ask the different speakers that are here, especially, all of you. I'll ask all of you if I have the time. I've got 3 minutes left. Why don't people want to go to college, or don't they go to college? How much of it's based upon affordability? How much of it's based upon people who are just not suited to go to college? And what can we do to get more people who either can't afford or don't want to go to college? I mean, if you don't go to college, you don't want to go take a class to become a welder where you're sitting in a classroom for a year and a half either. You want to go to work. You want to earn while you learn. You want to be in an apprenticeship program. So what can we do? What can we do for the 60% of Americans that don't graduate from college? And what can we do to get people to make more money by having a skill that's not necessarily what we think of as traditional graduate from college? So Steve Rose, you go first.
Well, we've started a welding program. And one of the things is that welding is a college subject these days. There's even college in Pennsylvania that's offering a bachelor's degree in welding. So what we've got to make sure in our colleges that we keep our curriculum up to date, and we are offering the type of things that are going to get people jobs, and those type of jobs that you're talking about, and that's what we constantly need to do. And again, keep it simple. Send a message that college is affordable by keeping these programs simple, and more people will go to college. I think it's pretty simple.
Marsha, what do you think? How come these people are not going to college? 60% of Americans don't graduate from college.
Yes, well, we have to build a college-going culture from the very beginning, in early childhood to K-12. We have a wealth of research that shows when a parent or the school system is able to build that from the very beginning, it increases the likelihood of students going to college. And we also know, in addition to higher ed being underfunded, we have a pretty stratified and underfunded K-12 system as well. For example, in high school, the school counselor student ratio is 461 students to one school counselor.
Yeah.
Luckily, I was able to have a school counselor that really invested into me, but not everyone has that. And it's not because school counselors they're having to deal with scheduling high school courses along with other things. So we have to start that from the very beginning.
Let me try and get the other folks to say something quickly. Ms. Johnston, you want to say something? Doctor?
Sure. I think that one thing we can do is take a look at those students who enroll but do not complete a degree. Those are the students who are, I would say, damaged the most through their educational experience because they leave with debt and no degree. If there is anything that we can do to help those students.
Why is that happening? Why are they applying, getting in college and then not graduating?
It may be financial. They may need more support financially, but they may need other kinds of support that might be offered through advising, through student services, Sometimes people have to drop out for family reasons. We've heard many of those stories. So
I'm out of time, but I apologize. It's the cruelty of the clock. But Susan and Scott, I'd like to, if you can, along the way when other people ask you questions, talk about this a little bit. I'd appreciate it. Mr. Chairman, thank you very much for my 5 minutes.
Chairman is very grateful for your questions. And now I'm going to ask and recognize Ms. Chu for 5 minutes. Ms.
Thank you,
Chu.
Mr. Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. Dr. Anthony, as one of 2 psychologists in Congress who spent 10 years paying off my graduate school loans, I'm particularly concerned about the rising cost of earning an advanced degree. While interest and payments on federal loans are fortunately still suspended till at least September 30th under the COVID-19 emergency measures, interest rates are set to rise by nearly a full percentage point for the 21-22 school year. And because the Budget Control Act of 2011 eliminated subsidized student loans for graduate students, these borrowers also pay interest while they are in school earning their degree. That's why I am reintroducing my legislation, the Post-Grad Act, to restore subsidized student loans for graduate students. Many career paths require an advanced degree but don't offer high starting salaries, such as social workers, school counselors, or teachers. Those additional few years of interest accrual are particularly harmful, especially for students who also took out loans to help pay for their undergraduate degree. So could you talk about whether you see low-income students being held out of career pathways that require an advanced degree but do not have especially high salaries because of more expensive borrowing conditions for graduate studies? And what remedies are there?
Yes, so I think this goes back to the point that because of a host of systemic issues, there are groups of students who are typically low income, people of color, who do have to generally get higher levels of degree to combat some aspect of employment discrimination, some aspect of pay disparities as well. We did a report not too long ago that showed grad programs enroll 15% of all students in higher ed, yet they account for 40% of Fed loans. And I remember when I was in school for grad school, I was asking, being Max Pell, what happened when I went to grad school? All of the loans were subsidized, and we do know that there are even disparities with funding. Typically, Black students don't have as much scholarship opportunities, fellowship opportunities as other students as well. So that in turn caused them to have to take out more loans as well. I think there's a host of solutions that the government can do. One is in instituting that, yes, there should be some type of subsidized requirement. There should also be some type of requirement for grad schools that they must not produce more debt than their completers can pay off. And so one solution that we recommend is similar to the gainful employment rule for career programs, is that we ensure that, that these programs are a benefit long-term for students, maybe institute some type of price caps on grad programs as well. But if broad fixes cannot be done, there is also opportunity to target specific types of programs. So for example, for doctoral degrees, possibly creating requirements for institution provided funding for students, rethinking maybe law school, maybe taking off a year or trying to embed that somehow in an undergraduate year or type of program. So there are some broad solutions that can work, and there are some more maybe specific ones that can handle and address that problem.
Thank you for that. Dr. Dynarski, I'm a member of both the Ways and Means and the Small Business Committee, and I'm particularly concerned about the impact of student debt on entrepreneurship, especially as we try to rebuild after COVID. We know that rising student debt has an enormous negative impact on entrepreneurship, depressing business creation by as much as 14%. And in fact, student debt negatively impacts a person's ability to qualify for business loans and is associated with a 42% decline in business income. This is why I'm an original co-sponsor of Nydia Velazquez's bill, the Supporting America's Young Entrepreneur Act of 2021, which would provide student loan forgiveness for entrepreneurs and ensure that forgiven loan is exempt from taxable income. So could you talk about how student loan impacts entrepreneurship?
Thank you for the question. Student loans perform an important role. There are limits to what we give out in terms of grants, and we have evidence that borrowing makes it more likely that people will accrue more credits and go on and graduate. So I think it's important to understand that student loans were created in order to create more access to college, and as long as we're not going to be giving completely free college out, that we're going to be needing student loans. Most people repay their student loans. Rather than see another targeted loan forgiveness program, I would honestly like to see a broad-based, universal income-based repayment program that helps everybody who needs a hand, right? So we've got quite a few people who are defaulting on pretty small loans, but it's because they have very small incomes. And a well-structured income-based repayment program would help to fix that. So I would like to see programs that insure everybody against bad outcomes, rather than add to the set of specific targeted programs as we have for teachers and doctors and so forth. But make loans work for everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Chu from California. And now I'm glad to recognize Mr. Wenstrom from Ohio for 5 minutes. You're on.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Ranking Member Kelly. When I finished my schooling and my surgical residency, I had substantial student loans. I had a whole list of loans. I was seeking them wherever I could. And so I understand the stress that goes with this and the uncertainty that it puts on someone when they graduate. And I also recognize the soaring cost of tuition and student loans and the threat they pose to access higher education and how that may affect our future workforce. And that is concerning. I can tell you with my loans, I had them all listed out and I paid off the high interest loans as soon as I can and ran out the low interest loans. And at the end of the day, it worked out. But, we consider education, we all know one size fits all is not right. Sometimes we place emphasis on a traditional 4-year degree. And while these programs may be the best option for some students, it's not the answer for everybody. Students may benefit from the other options that wouldn't require loans to pay for the program. And I think that we can work towards policies to help our students who have taken on this debt, while at the same time looking to expand the menu of options for students considering higher education. And we have some things out there. For example, this committee is considering securing a strong retirement act of 2021. Just in a nutshell, it allows employers to invest in a new employee's retirement and matches what they're paying off in student loans. So they're not paying off student loans and being held out from retirement. But that's kind of some of the bigger picture. Mr. Swazi was talking about the welding students. I remember when I met some welding students at vocational school, they were the happiest seniors in high school that I met because they knew that they had a good paying job just waiting for them, and they had a lot of certainty associated with it. And I recently visited Great Oaks Career Campus, a career technical education school in my district that had been providing innovative career development, workforce development, economic development services. And they were providing to individuals, businesses, industry, labor, communities, and other organizations for 50 years. So they're plugging into the community. And I've also heard from employers who are having a hard time filling available positions due to the skills gap. So there are many paths out of high school. We need more skilled workers with career and technical education to meet the needs of industries. And they keep them, they drive America. I think in some ways we had an attitude that if you don't have a 4-year degree, somehow you failed. And I think nothing can be further from the truth. So I have a question for Mr. Pulsipher, if I can. How do you think Congress can help prospective students be better to be fully aware of what their options are? As a soldier, I talk to GIs, they're going to use their GI Bill, and I always talk to them about, listen, do your homework. You got this great benefit, but make sure you're using it towards something that's going to enhance your availability and your marketability in the workforce. So how do we make people more aware of that? And also, how can we ensure that institutions are able to keep costs affordable so that people aren't burdened with debt for the rest of their life sometimes?
Yeah. Thank you, Congressman Wenstrup, for that question. Also, love the great state of Ohio. It's we've now had 3 years a state affiliate in the great state there, where the state has partnered with WGU to expand access among the many working learners and those who have some college and no degree. I think to your question, one of the most important things to actually do is increase the transparency and the understanding about the multiple pathways that can lead to great opportunities. And there is an opportunity to actually provide greater, evidence and information as it relates to what are those different pathways, what are the earning and economic potentials of those different pathways, where can those pathways be actually pursued, because not all of them need to go through a college. Many of them can go through alternative providers, even employer-provided training programs. This is one of the dynamics that exist today in higher education, or at least in post-secondary education, I would say, is that to the future of work, where more than 65% of all the jobs are going to require some post-secondary credential. The acquisition of those credentials is also going to come through multiple different pathways, but individuals need to be able to have that information available to them. So Congress can actually increase that transparency. It can help to actually give better information about the outcomes that are expected through those different pathways. But to the second question as to how do you lower cost, there's much more time needed to discuss related to the institutional side, but certainly Congress can increase the transparency around what is the cost of attendance to pursue those different pathways, how much should an individual consider in financing, what aid programs are eligible for them, et cetera, so that they can complete and ultimately be on their pathway to the job.
Thank you, my time.
Dr. Wenstrup, I want to thank you for your line of questioning, because I think options is something we need to put on the table, because a lot of these kids think the only way they're going to, the road through success, somebody mentioned it earlier, is to go to a 4-year college right away. And that to me is very short-sighted. So thank you for your line of questioning, Dr. Wenstrup.
Thank you.
The chair now recognizes Mr. Dockett for 5 minutes. Mr. Dockett from the great state of Texas.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and thanks for the insightful comments of each of our witnesses. Speaking of Texas, it was over 50 years ago that President Lyndon B. Johnson signed the first Higher Education Act in San Marcos, Texas, is at what is now Texas State University, the college that he attended, and in an area that I have the good fortune to represent today. At that time, he proudly proclaimed that his objective was that, quote, a high school senior anywhere in this great land of ours can apply to any college or any university in any of the 50 states and not be turned away because his family is poor. Well, sadly, as our witnesses today have indicated, and as we can all see, America has not been able to fulfill his promise to our young people. Cost is now far too often a barrier, an insurmountable barrier to the economically disadvantaged in getting post-secondary education of whatever type. More than a decade ago, I personally authored legislation to help restore some of that promise to the extent we could through our committee. Those are the provisions of the American Opportunity Tax Credit, or AOTC. Since 2009, the AOTC has helped millions of Americans pay for college. It provides a modest $2,500 a year in tuition, fees, and other educational expenses. It'll be $10,000 over 4 years. And it provides that a portion of that credit is refundable. Through the years, I've attempted to strengthen and expand it. Now, a couple of our witnesses have questioned the wisdom of using tax credits and tax expenditures to do what could be done more directly through a direct expenditure or appropriation. Let me say that I, as the author of this tax credit, am the first person to agree with them. I wish they could convince a majority of this committee on both sides of the aisle that that was the better approach. I would prefer a more Pell Grant to the American Opportunity Tax Credit. But we live in a reality where this committee is in charge of tax expenditures and has a preference for those in many cases. And as a practical matter, while tax expenditures have the same impact on the budget deficit as direct expenditures, particularly some of our Republican colleagues will vote for a tax expenditure when they will oppose a direct expenditure. Whatever method we use, and it ought to be as simple and direct as possible, whether the issue is providing for higher education, providing affordable housing, providing for electric charging stations, or any number of other purposes considered in our committee. I prefer the direct expenditure, but I also prefer the pragmatism of trying to get as much assistance to students who are trying to get a higher education as we possibly can provide. I think our objective has to be to get those students all of the education that they're willing to work for to try to achieve their full God-given potential. Now, as we look at the approach to do that, many students who have been eligible for the American Opportunity Tax Credit and also eligible for Pell Grants have not been able to get the full benefit of both. So last Friday, and Ranking Member Kelly has already referenced this, and Congressman Davis, all of us came together, about 40 plus colleagues, to introduce bipartisan legislation to fix this problem, to assure that those who are using a Pell Grant can also get the full benefit of the American Opportunity Tax Credit. Mr. Chairman, I appreciate the fact that you joined in that effort. Our Tax-Free Pell Grants Act would extend the tax-free usage of Pell Grants from tuition to cover all educational expenses like room and board. And this bill also expands the qualifying expenses for the AOTC to cover computer costs, obviously invaluable in higher education these days, and childcare, which is also significant to being allowing many college students to continue with their education or in a non-college setting for post-secondary. So childcare has become a barrier for many students. This bill is designed to remove it. Dr. Johnson, let me just ask you in my closing time here, in your written testimony, you support ending the taxability of scholarship and grant aid. Why do you believe that it is important to do that to assist students who are economically disadvantaged from continuing with their education?
Thank you, Congressman. And let me start by thanking you for your efforts to improve the taxation challenges that face many of our students. And we would welcome a long-term opportunity to work more with you on that.
Great.
The much of what you've said, I agree with completely, and I am grateful to hear you talk about the Pell Grant in particular. In terms of the taxation, I think that in many cases, students are not taking advantage of what is available to them. I think the keep it simple idea is part of what we need to address so that students understand how they can take advantage of what's available. But in terms of the AOTC Pell interaction, the credit contains a grant offset provision that has an unintended effect by sharply limiting or eliminating the benefit received by these students. And approximately 725,000 students are affected adversely by that every academic year. So the work that you are doing is critical in that, and we would support your continued work in that.
Thank you very much. Let me ask Dr. Rose how childcare is a barrier to student success and the importance of our addressing childcare expenses for our post-secondary students.
Congressman Doggett, excuse me, our time has run out.
I understand, Mr. Chair. I'll just do it in writing then.
I think you're going to ask a great question. But would you please submit it? I'd appreciate it.
Certainly. Thank you.
Several of the great doctors that are here today, they're great personalities in education. And thank you for your very refreshing testimony. And we're now going to call on Mr. Evans for 5 minutes from the great state of Pennsylvania. Thank you, Mr.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My home city of Philadelphia has one of the largest Black populations nationwide. Yet a large disparity exists between the education attainment of its Blacks and white residents. In Center City area, which has restaurants, shops, clothes, and a thriving art scene, 75% of residents have college degrees. But in Philadelphia past industrial areas on the outer edge where Black residents have suffered from decades of continuous economic disinvestment and intergeneration poverty, education attainment are below 25%. The Investment American Act, which the House is set to pass this week, investment in money in workforce development, especially for training for infrastructure-related dollars. Dr. Rose, to those in Philadelphia who currently have no education or little college education, what do you think is the most practical way for them to increase their economic opportunity, technical training, workforce development programs, earning an associate degree, or earning a bachelor's degree? Dr. Rose?
Look, there's no one answer to that question. You know, for many students, workforce development programs are absolutely what they need. You know, some folks can't, you know, commit to doing something for 2 years or 4 years. And if we can get them through a program in 6 months or a year that can get them to the type of wage that's going to be life-changing for them, you know, that's what we need to do for them. So, you know, we need to make opportunities available. I don't want to tell somebody, you know, you shouldn't go get a PhD. You know, if that's what they want to do, and if they're willing to put the time in to do that, great. But if, you know, workforce development programs are a key to getting, you know, students those types of jobs. And, you know, we find very often when students start at a workforce development program, you know, become a welder, become something in the healthcare area, they come back. You know, they'll become a phlebotomist and go out and, you know, learn how to take blood, and they get into the field, and all of a sudden they're the ones applying to become a registered nurse and to take it to the next level. So, you know, just because you're starting at a workforce development program doesn't mean that's where you're going to end up.
Meaning that where you start is not where you finish, huh?
It doesn't have to be.
I thank you, Mr. Chairman. I thank you for your answer, Dr. Rose. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back, bouncing my time. Mr. Chairman.
Thank you for being with us today. And you asked a very, very pointed question, and you got a good answer too. And I think you can build on the answer. But thank you for being with us today, Mr. Evans, from the great state of Pennsylvania. The chair now recognizes Mr. Smucker from Pennsylvania for 5 minutes. Mr. Smucker, thank you for being with us.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thanks to all the witnesses for being here today. Mr. Pulsifer, it's good to see you again. We've had a chance to meet several times during the past 2 Congresses when I was a member of the Education and Labor Committee. And I spent much of my 2 years as the ranking member on the Higher Education and Workforce Investment Subcommittee discussing the reauthorization of the Higher Education Act. And one of the things I was pushing for was emphasizing the importance of alternatives to traditional 4-year degrees, including apprenticeships and career and technical education. Now, just again, a little background, you know, I was a non-traditional student in college, working during the day, attending college at night. And in fact, I was the first from my family to graduate, not only attend college, but also to graduate from high school. And so I've seen the importance of education and what it can do to ensure we have a great career and provide a lot of opportunities for me. And we want every single child, every single student to be able to access a great career, have their own opportunity to live the American dream, and we want them to ensure they have the best pathway to get there. So, you know, I support aid to those who need help, but I think there are impacts of that we have to talk about, particularly as Democrats on the committee here are proposing a massive expansion of federal spending. So, you had mentioned a 120% increase in the cost of a four-year degree, or that's factoring in inflation since, when did you say that was?
1985.
So 120%, more than doubled since 1985. I think, again, I support aid, but I also think we have to consider that the more money somebody else is putting in rather than the individual, the less accountability there is in the cost and ensuring that it's the right pathway for students. Do you agree with that? Do you have concerns with that?
I do. I think we should all have concerns about this because you are right. That is a 120% increase on an inflation-adjusted basis. Over that 35 years, the cost of education has risen about 2 to 3 percentage points faster than inflation each year. And the reality is that the cost of instruction, the cost of services, the cost of administration is like so many of these are contributing factors to that, but certainly on the public side, some of the state-funded budgets and supporting the post-secondary public education has also been a factor in that. But what is a challenge is that there is no check against that rising cost. Certainly, many of the public institutions still have accountability to state boards of education, state regions, et cetera. But the reality is that individuals and their families are bearing a higher portion now of the cost of attending education. And without any check against that rising cost, it's a real problem.
So if I can stop you, I don't have a lot of time here. What would you do? Like, do you think it makes sense to provide free college to everyone? And if someone like myself who really wants to ensure there's access, what's a better way to do it that provides some of that check that you're talking about?
I think certainly there are opportunities to address the affordability barrier that still exists for so many that many of the colleagues testifying today have raised. But there are other issues too that do need to be addressed. And some of that is simply about increasing the focus on the student and how do you address access through things like the digital divide and leveraging technology to reach and teach students where they are. How do you actually incentivize alternative post-secondary programs so that in fact those pathways to great jobs can also be accessible through federal aid programs because they can be done at a lower cost and in a shorter duration than so many of the traditional bachelor's degree model. The other thing is we do have to think about different pedagogical and personalized learning models that can actually help increase completion rates, especially among underserved populations or those who've been marginalized. And ultimately, that's what we're trying to fund here, which is completion rates, because as has been mentioned many times, a student who starts but does not complete is often worse off because they're carrying debt.
One of the things I like about what you do is competency-based rather than just measuring success based on the amount of time sitting in a seat. It's competency-based education. I think that's another. We've also talked about transparency. I think the more information we can get out about the job outcomes and so on of not only specific colleges but other majors, or specific majors, I should say, that's going to help students make the right decisions for them as well. So I'm out of time. I have a lot more questions here, but thank you so much for being here. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
You did a good job in questioning. I don't agree with everything you said, but that's unimportant. You brought up some very good questions. We need an elaboration of what you said. We don't have the time here. But I'm telling you, you hit some very important questions that we need all to discuss in our own heads. I mean, a lot of these college presidents want to build Taj Mahals. You know that. They want to build the big buildings out in the suburbs, and they want, so that in the city where there's no campus, there's no green, you're just there. And there's a job being done in both places, no question about it. And I thank you for your testimony. And I thank also the witness who had a lot of things to say. Whether I agreed is not important. I want to call on and recognize Mr. Horsford for 5 minutes.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and to the ranking member for this very important hearing on expanding access to post-secondary education and the promise that it holds. I really want to appreciate our witnesses for their great insight and testimonies. In fact, with the Western Governors University, I actually, when I was in the state Senate, worked with our then governor, Brian Sandoval, to help make sure Nevada was a part of that effort. And I believe in an all-above approach to post-secondary education. Before I came to Congress, I ran the state's largest joint labor management training partnership for the hospitality industry. So I've seen firsthand how training, education, and opportunities for youth and adults is critically important, particularly as we address our competitiveness for the 21st century. I also want to ask about the ways that we can achieve racial equity within our post-secondary education institutions, for all institutions, but community colleges and four-year institutions specifically. As one of the co-chairs for the Ways and Means Racial Equity Initiative, we've been looking at educational equity, which is a particular focus. Professor Anthony, Dr. Anthony, can you highlight, or you highlighted, excuse me, in your article back in April, that over the past decade, Black and Latinx youth adults experienced the most dramatic growth in attainment, but they also started off with the lowest skill attainment rates compared with other racial or ethnic groups, and that they remain the least likely to earn a college degree. Moreover, the attainment rates among Black and Latinx men are even lower. You state that these alarming equity gaps in attainment exist because of structural inequities in our society, including in the education system, which consistently fails to serve Black and Latinx adults. Mr. Anthony, as I mentioned earlier, our work on the Racial Equity Initiative, we have been tasked with addressing these inequities, specifically within the tax code, to create more just tax system that is equitable for everyone. So what are your recommendations for how we can address this issue within our education system?
Thank you for your question, Congressman. Yes, I also want to bring up another point that was in that piece. Some college, no degree has come up through this conversation, and just to point out how deep the inequities are rooted. Among young adults ages 25 to 34, there are about 7.5 million young college students who go to college but don't complete. If we were to re-engage all of those students, about 2/3 of the young adult population would be college educated, which would be an amazing accomplishment for the country. But there would still be disparities by race and by gender as well. So that's how deep they are. When it comes to the tax code, my broad response is saying that, and it's been brought up before, the federal tax code must be progressive. It must, so therefore it can actually benefit low income, middle income families who need the services, who need that benefit the most. And right now, with majority of the tax cuts right now or incentives, it's regressive. So we're actually providing additional resources to higher income families who can afford to go to college anyway. And so the goal of Lyndon B. Johnson in 65 and the Higher Ed Act is to actually expand education for low income, middle income families, because it helps the country. There's an economic return on investment for the public of higher education. And so in order to do that, we have to ensure that we have targeted approaches by race, by income, by disability status, where we can ensure that we are actually targeting those services to help those students and families the most. And right now, we just don't have a tax code or higher education system that works in the benefit of or the purpose of fulfilling what President Johnson intended for back in the 60s.
Thank you, Mr. Anthony. I look forward to working with you and our other panelists to identify further recommendations, and I particularly agree with the point that you and others have made around the federal student aid lack of support and the fact that that has not kept up. Tuition rates have increased, but the level of financial aid to middle class families has not. And people should not have to go into debt at the amounts that they are in order to pursue an education for themselves and their family. And that is something that I believe we also need to address, Mr. Chairman. With that, I yield back.
Thank you for your questions. And thank you, Mr. Anthony, Dr. Anthony, for joining in something that we should all be thinking about as we move forward in these matters. I think this was a very good example that Dr. Anthony brought up, and we should concentrate on that also and connect this with the last question we talked about. So thank you, Mr. Horsford from Nevada. And now we have Mr. Schneider from Illinois, 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to thank you for hosting this hearing on a very critical issue to our entire nation, but especially to our students. I want to thank the witnesses for sharing your testimony and your perspectives here on the barriers to higher education, how we can work together in Congress to make education more affordable and accessible to every American. As we discussed here today, the cost of higher education has ballooned, saddling the average American who has student loans with $38,000 in debt. Of that debt, the highest concentration belongs to young adults between the ages of 25 and 34. I regularly hear from constituents in the prime of their lives whose goals, like starting their own small business, are stalled because of the crippling debt they took on to pursue their education. I've heard from a mother of 3 who struggled to afford her family's medical expenses while paying off the debt she acquired from going to college. I've heard from the family unable to buy a home in the wake of more than a decade of paying off student loans. And I've heard from young people spread even more thin financially because of the recent strains caused by the COVID-19 pandemic. So I'm grateful for the opportunity to address these issues as part of the Ways and Means Committee. To tackle the student loan crisis and make college more affordable, we must understand just what young people today are facing compared to past generations. What I'd like to do is start with Dr. Anthony. In your opening testimony, you said, quote, "If you think students today can work their way through college, think again," end quote. That sentiment, I think, reflects what I'm hearing from so many young people in my community. I know when I was in school a long, long time ago, people could work a 10-hour work-study job and graduate with little or no debt. You talked about it not being possible. Can you talk more about the hidden costs that come with being a student today, aside from what we often think of, which is the rising cost of tuition, how the financial burden affects a person's ability to excel in school and their career beyond, lying awake late at night, as you said, worrying about making ends meet, and how these variables compounded by the decades of stagnant wages for workers at the lowest end of the income spectrum are affecting ability of educating our young people.
Thank you for your question, Congressman. Yes, so I want to also put that point into context. I wrote it in the testimony, in the written testimony, that the reason why working is not an issue, but we want to be careful with students having to work too much. And so the amount that's left over, the net price after a student's cost of attendance, and then when you account for federal financial aid, students have to make up for that gap either by working or taking out student loans. The studies show that after working about 15 hours after 15 hours per week, it can slow a student's progress towards a degree or cause them to leave college altogether. Again, we've already talked extensively about the issue of some college, no degree. And so, yes, we need to ensure that we are building a system where that there's a reasonable amount of hours, that students can work in order for it to be a benefit to their educational experience and not a hindrance. And we have students right now who are having to do not just one job, but multiple jobs because the demographic is changing. Nearly 60% of the undergraduate population are what some consider post-traditional, non-traditional students, juggling both college, work, and family responsibility. So they have to make that up somehow. And so the way that we can ensure that we are benefiting these students is to, one, again, give direct more aid so they don't have to worry about having to work too much or take out more loans. And this committee has the opportunity to try to benefit a tax code that, again, will be more progressive so we can get direct aid more into the hands of students so they don't have to rely on working too much.
No, I appreciate that. I was a dorm advisor when I was in college, and it was a big job, but I didn't have the other family responsibilities as you touched on. And for the non-traditional student, 15, 16 hours, that's 2 full days a week while trying to go to school full time. That is a burden. I'm going to shift gears a little bit. If I go to Dr. Dynarski real briefly, you talked in your opening testimony, your written testimony, about the complexity of just putting together the whole package of student aid, figuring out the tax incentives and everything else. Could you expand a little bit more on the simplicity? One of the things I appreciate is if we can make it simple, if we can make it straightforward may be a better term than simple, I decide I want to pursue higher education. I can do it and do it in a straightforward manner. I'm more likely to achieve my goals. What would you recommend we do as far as simplicity?
I would say that the key principles we need in place are that students know with certainty, well in advance, that college is going to be affordable. Right? So it's okay if it's complicated on our side, on the government side, in terms of the budget and and how things run. What matters is for the students and the families themselves. For them, it needs to be straightforward and simple. So, you know, the University of Michigan introduced a radically simplified approach for selected low-income students. They were promised upfront, no strings attached, that they would get 4 years of free tuition and fees. Didn't need to fill out the profile, didn't need to fill out the FAFSA. If they got in, they were going to get free tuition and fees. And when we told students this, it tripled the application rates and it doubled the share of low-income students who chose to attend University of Michigan. This is pretty straightforward. We right now hide a lot of money behind a lot of forms. We delay information about how affordable college can be. And if we instead shift the information forward and guarantee students that they're going to have their tuition and fees covered, we'll have a much larger effect than we do, even if we use the same dollars. For community colleges, the most simple way to do this is to just make them tuition free. I don't think anybody should be borrowing to go to community college. Right now, we've put people in a bind where they either need to borrow or they need to work more. And working more puts them at greater risk of dropping out, while borrowing puts them at greater risk if they drop out. And it shouldn't be a dangerous gamble to go to college, but we have made it that. And it's time to go back to a time when it was more doable to do so.
Thank you,
Thank you. I've
Mr.
exceeded my
Schneider.
time, so I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Schneider, for your eloquent questions, and to thank the professor for jumping in on us with us. And now I'm going to turn to Ms. Plaskett, who's here with us today.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for convening such a really important and really dynamic hearing where we're getting some tremendous information that's going to really, I believe, inform this our committee on how to support higher education and young people in enrollment in community college. This is a question specifically for Dr. Susan Johnson, but for all of the panelists. I've just learned for my district, the University of the Virgin Islands, which is the only higher education institution in the Virgin Islands, in my district, has implemented a COVID-19 vaccine requirement for all students, faculty, and staff. I learned that over 360 public and private colleges are requiring vaccination prior to enrollment, with that number of institutions growing every day. As colleges are returning to in-class instruction, how has vaccination requirements affected enrollment for the fall semester? And how is the administration enforcing and supporting and confirming this compliance at this time?
Thank you for that question. As I was listening to you, I was thinking of my own service as a member of the Board of Trustees of two different colleges, a public and a private, and these are topics that have come before us for conversation. It is a great concern that students be safe and healthy, that faculty and staff be safe and healthy, and yet there is some political discussion behind the requirement. And so that's why you see the numbers that you see around 400 are requiring, and the rest have yet to make up their minds, or they have made up their minds, they're not falling into that category. It does make this a challenging environment to lead an institution when you hear from parents, if you have this requirement, I will not send my daughter. And if you have this requirement, and if you don't have this requirement, I won't send my daughter. So damned if you do and damned if you don't in a lot of cases. The highest order of business is to make sure students are safe. And I think that the leadership that institutions show by finding a way to ensure that safety, whether it is continuing the testing over time as students come back. If there is no COVID requirement, then continue the testing. That continues rather high cost for an institution. However, we knew during the pandemic that institutions were spending lots and lots of money on the safety measures that they had to put in place. So it is a complicated question that each institution is weighing, but I think regardless of the answer, the heart of the matter is the safety of the students and the other people who work on the campus, and finding a way to manage the cost associated with continued testing versus the health issues.
Vaccination requirements, especially for students in regions with limited vaccine supplies. That's also a question that I have.
Requiring the vaccination in areas where there are no easy ways to get the vaccination seems problematic. I know a lot of colleges are using their facilities, their connections, and their own resources and government resources to make sure that they get access to the required vaccinations. I think another problem with this is making sure that we're not on emergency approval for some of the vaccinations. That has been a problem for some institutions and some students and parents.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, I've heard that repeatedly in my own community as a rationale, be it right or wrong, as to why people are not getting the vaccine. So to push FDA to get to the place where this is no longer just an emergency approval, I think would go a long way in dispelling some of the myths and notions and conspiracy theories that are out there. Thank you very much for the opportunity to question the panelists. Thank you to the panelists for their time, and I yield back.
Congresswoman Plunkett, thank you for your participation today. And I want to say this, what's pretty remarkable about the attendance we had today, the people who've come on outside of our committee. And that's good. That's a good sign. Great issue, because it sounded like sleep time, usual the educational jargon. There are no vitriolics here. We got a job together to make this work because it has such an important effect on people's lives. We see it time and time again. You're talking about COVID. How can you not talk about education? And yet that's just the beginning of the discussion. And our next questioner is Dr. Davis. Mr. Davis is always there on educational matters, human quality, and we're thankful that he's here today. Mr. Davis, you have 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and you're exactly correct in your analysis of this hearing. It's been a great one. And I want to thank you for letting me wave on to it. I've spent decades trying to help low-income students afford college, coordinating the AOTC and Pell grants, trying to make Pell more taxable, and better targeting the American Opportunity Tax Credit were some of my first bills on this committee when I came. I'm working closely with Representatives Schweikert, Horsford, Winstrup, Sewell, and Marchant to remove the lifetime ban on the American Opportunity Tax Credit for individuals with felony drug convictions. And Mr. Smith from Missouri and I are trying to double the Section 127 employer provided education benefit to help workers improve their skills. Families, especially low income and first generation students, need us to modernize these benefits. Professor Donarski, let me ask you, my ideal higher ed tax policy aligns with your testimony. A simple set amount of funds based on one's income that one could use for undergraduate or graduate degree or credential. Current costs are student loan debt. Taxpayers would know how much they had and decide when to use the funds to best meet their education needs. If we were to advance this type of approach, aside from being advanceable, refundable, and having eligible expenses aligned with other tax policy, what type of parameters would be needed to make sure that a credit would work, that it did work?
There are lots of different ways to design an effective and equitable system for funding college, and your suggested policy certainly aligns with the research. You know, the key for making an aid program work really well is that students need to be guaranteed their money early, and they shouldn't have to wade through bureaucratic sludge to get hold of that money, right? So the tax incentives clearly do not meet these standards. The traditional student aid programs are getting better, especially with the recent simplification, and I thank you for that. When we've got two sets of programs together funding college, the tax system as well as the traditional aid system, we need to be extremely vigilant about unintended collisions between the programs. And I don't know if it's anybody's job to watch out for those, because basically every time something changes in the tax code or changes on the aid side, you potentially create bad collisions of those two programs. So, you know, the examples we've already heard are that the Pell Grant means that getting a Pell Grant means that the AOTC gets reduced, right? So if we're going to have multiple programs, somebody needs to be out there keeping track of how they interact so that students don't get hurt by it. And that's what I would say is most important, that and that the money get delivered when students are paying the bills. Delivering the money a year later doesn't help anybody get to college. Thank you for your question.
Thank you so much. And Dr. Johnston, if I could ask you, in addition to helping students directly, I'm also trying to create a tax incentive for colleges and universities to graduate more low-income students with little debt to supplement, not supplant, discretionary programs. Of course, this is tricky because nonprofits do not have tax liability. I've thought about an institutional education tax credit similar to the new market tax credit that went to institutions of higher education that graduated their low-income students with little debt. You raised a different intriguing point, and that is that colleges really like bonds with good terms. Would a robust institutional credit or a generous muni bond be good incentives to help college graduates, low-income students with little debt?
Thank you for that question. I think overall, let me just say again that the Pell Grant is the most efficient way for the federal government to invest in students, but a tax credit related to the investments that institutions are making in grant aid is an intriguing idea, one that should be explored further. I think there is possibility for that. One thing, as you've noted, is that colleges are often tax exempt and will have varying tax liabilities. Some may have UBIT, unrelated tax income, that could make such a tax credit of interest to them. So I encourage you to pursue that idea.
Thank you very much. And again, Mr. Chairman, it has been a great hearing. Thank you for letting me wave on. And I think everybody wanted to wave on because you hold such great hearings. And I've been on every one I think you've had, and I'm not a member of your committee.
Well, we're going to get it even more exciting as we go on here, but this is a great issue and you've been a great advocate. And I just want to recommend or suggest to you, Congressman Davis, that you look at my thoughts about baby bonds and connecting this together with what your ideas are. And I think we can get our Mr. Kelly and others to look at it as well. I think it makes a lot of sense. It struck me when you were talking, but thank you for your tremendous work that you did in education before this. And thank you for your comments. I appreciate them very, very much.
Thank you.
You're welcome. The chair now recognizes the great Mr. Kildee from Michigan for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman Pasquale, and I share my colleague, Mr. Davis's view. This is a very critical hearing, and I really appreciate you allowing us to wave on. You've got nearly the entire Ways and Means Committee participating in this, so thank you for that. My first real job in life was as a social worker. I worked at an agency, a treatment agency for children who have experienced trauma and abuse, the Whaley Children's Center in Flint, my hometown. And many of those children came from and left to go into the foster care system. So this issue around foster kids is really near and dear to my heart. So I want to focus a bit of my attention on the higher education opportunities made available to foster youth. In our economy, as we've well established, some post-secondary education, either an apprenticeship program like the one Mr. Swazi was pointing to, or an associate's degree, or a four-year program. One of those is important and potentially essential to getting a good paying job that you can use to raise a family. But there are some unique barriers that youth from the foster care system face when pursuing post-secondary education. And those barriers have been made worse during this pandemic. But what we've seen is that institutions of higher education with campus-based support programs for foster youth that provide services like, for example, securing stable housing during academic breaks or counseling services have led to really significant improvements in performance, increased graduation rates. And as an example, the University of Michigan's Blavin Scholars Program, which serves foster youth, has a graduation rate of over 95%. Not only is that much higher than the average for foster youth, it's much higher for all students. So in Michigan, over 30 college campuses provide these on-site support and resource tailored to meet the unique needs of youth with experience in foster care who are attending college. And that's why I introduced legislation with my colleague, Representative Bacon, called the Fostering Post-Secondary Success for Foster and Homeless Youth Act that would expand these programs across the country. First, this bill would create a recognition program through the U.S. Department of Education to identify and to highlight those colleges and universities with tailored campus-based support programs for foster youth, for homeless youth. And secondly, the bill would create a national center for fostering post-secondary success for foster and homeless youth. This would put the best practices out there and provide technical help to institutions as they try to maintain these campus-based supports. So Dr. Donarski. You might not be surprised since I mentioned the University of Michigan, one of my schools, that I'd love to get your thoughts on this, on what we can be doing through financial support, coaching, mentoring, how we can use, say, for example, the federal tax code to help foster youth access and succeed in college. And then any other thoughts you might have on how we can help clear a pathway for foster youth.
I would say that the most important priority would be funding the schools that these students attend. So Michigan is able to run a program like this because it's got the endowment that lets it run it. A lot of our other public institutions are living off of tuition, and they've seen their contributions from their states go down. And what tends to get cut is support services. So I think if we want to support foster students, foster children, we should be looking to support the schools that low-income students attend, and those are community colleges and public universities. We have models for programs that work well in increasing graduation rates for at-risk populations. The CUNY ASAP program is a wraparound program that provides financial support, mentoring, tutoring, emergency financial backup, all of these things that a parent, if they were well-heeled and present, would do for their kids. The school kicks in instead and helps out. And that's essentially what we need to be thinking of, is that for children, for adults who don't have parents with deep pockets, who don't have family who went to college, then the institution needs to be doing the work that otherwise parents would be doing. The informal counseling that happens around the kitchen table sometimes needs to be formalized for a foster child, for example.
I really appreciate those comments, and I see the other panelists nodding their heads. I wish we had time to explore this further, but I do look forward to my legislation moving forward, and I would invite any of you to provide input on the work that we're doing, that Congressman Bacon and I are doing to try to stand up these programs to assist foster youth. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for what has been just an excellent hearing. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Kilby, and we appreciate your question. I think it's very important, and thank you. Come again.
Will do.
And let's hear it for our round. This is the cleanup hitter, Jim Panetta from California, for 5 minutes. Jim, you're on.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate this opportunity to be a part not only of the Oversight Subcommittee here, but to be a part of this excellent hearing on expanding access to higher education. I truly appreciate it. And of course, thanks to all our witnesses as well. I appreciate this because obviously having access to higher education is important for a number of reasons. I guess I kind of take it a little bit personal when we're talking about community colleges, because I and my two older brothers were all products of community colleges, and that basically coming out of high school, all three of us knew that we weren't ready to go on to a 4-year. So we went to our junior college, got straight, pivoted from athletics to academics, worked full time, and were able to pay our way through the 4-year colleges that we went to. They went to Berkeley, I went to Davis, so the UC schools. And so I'm a firm believer in community colleges. And as we know, traditionally, it was more of a state purview. But I'm so glad now that the federal government is actually taking interest in our community colleges, and especially this administration. And that's exactly why I joined members of Congress recently who were also community college graduates, and writing to the First Lady, Dr. Jill Biden, asking her to work with the administration and us to support community colleges and what we can do. So President Rose, I'm going to hit on you for a lot of my questions, if that's all right, just to prepare you and so the other witnesses can kind of zone out if they want. President Rose, how can the federal government better support community colleges like yours?
Again, I think it really just comes down. We need a simple message that it's affordable to students. When we're talking to students, doesn't matter whether they're in 6th grade or 7th grade or 12th grade, they've got to have a message that they can go to college. And if they know that that's a possibility for them, they'll start focusing on that. And truthfully, they'll start taking the right courses. You heard earlier that the ratio of high school guidance counselors to students is not good. in most schools. And, you know, we can't count on somebody else to deliver that message. It's got to be just, you know, it's clear. You can go to college, and if they get that message, you know, we'll get more of these students into college. I don't think it's much more complicated.
Yeah, I agree, and that's why I trust me. I deliver that message each time I go speak at high schools, or no matter who I talk to. I'm proud to say that I'm a community college graduate, and that it is accessible. And as I see it, it's real foundation upon which you can do a number of things. In which ways, Dr. President Rose, does Passaic support non-traditional students? Obviously, you know, you understand the stereotype of traditional students going away to college. But in what ways are community colleges more accessible to those who work, have families to take care of?
Well, that's basically all our students. I mean, that's, you know, you could be 18 years old. It doesn't mean you're a traditional student. You know, the students, you know, 20% of our students are single parents. You know, you've got to train your faculty to work with different types of students. They have to be more flexible. They have to understand that if students are working a full-time job, that they're going to get called into overtime, and they're going to have things. And a faculty member can't say, "Oh, you'll have a strict policy on your syllabus says you missed 2 classes, you failed the class." You know, that's the type of attitude you have to have. We just, for the first time, have hired social workers in addition to our counseling staff. You know, a social worker approaches things from a very different point of view than does a counselor. And, you know, students have problems with homelessness. They have all these issues. And if we have someone on staff who can help them, that's going to make all the difference in the world.
Now, you also said beyond non-traditional, you also said that Passaic Community Colleges serves a lot of minority students, along with many whom English is a second language. For those students, ESL programs like those at Hartnell College, another community college in my district, one of 4 in my district, including Monterey Peninsula College, where I went to. I got to give them a shout out. They can help, the ESL programs can help them perfect their English skills to pursue and help pursue other additional educational opportunities. President Rose, how are community colleges uniquely equipped to help those types of students to speak English as a second language?
Oh, we have programs. We're in the communities. I mean, that's the whole point. I mean, Congressman Pascrell was a trustee at our college when it was first founded, and he fought to have the college put in the middle of our downtown area. And by putting it in the middle of the downtown area, and his argument was, this is where it needs to be to serve the students who need it the most. And those are the students who have limited English language proficiency. And if you put it right where they live, they're going to be more likely to come to it and take advantage of it.
Good to hear. My time's up. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, President Rose. Thank you, Chairman Pascrell, for this opportunity to have this conversation.
Well, Congressman Panetta, you're a live example of what we're talking about today, and you're proud of it, and we're proud of you. And thank you for your interpretation of what we're doing today. Thank you, Dr. Rose, for your answers. I want to thank Dr. Anthony today, Dr. Johnston today, Dr. Rose today, doctor's name I have a difficult, Dr. Donarski today, and Dr. Pulsifer today. Thank you all. What an excellent panel. Let's give them, to those who are left, let's clap and give them a great round of applause. They did a good job. I think Kelly would agree with me on this. They did an excellent job. I'd like to thank our witnesses today for joining us. Please be advised that members have 2 weeks to submit written questions to be answered later in writing. Those questions and your answers will be made part of the formal hearing record. With that, the subcommittee stands adjourned.